Would you form an opinion about someone without knowing their past? She did, and the emotional toll came swiftly. The soft drone of the jet engines filled the cabin as passengers got comfortable in their seats. It was an early evening flight, from Atlanta to Tucson, just a quick hop that most assumed would be smooth and uneventful. Among the travelers was a tall man dressed in military attire. His uniform was sharp, every crease in place, and he carried himself with a quiet dignity. Though he drew a certain respect simply by being there, he seemed more interested in staying under the radar. He offered a courteous nod to the flight crew and quietly settled into a seat near the center of the aircraft. A few rows up, a woman likely in her mid-50s sat with a posture that radiated entitlement. She wore a sleek blazer and clutched her purse tightly, scanning the cabin like she owned it. Her gaze fell on the man in uniform as he lifted his military bag into the overhead bin. Her expression subtly tightened, lips curling ever so slightly before she turned her attention back to her phone. As the crew made their way down the aisle for final checks, the man took his seat. The woman, shifting in her chair, murmured just loud enough to be overheard by nearby passengers. You'd think they'd put people like that somewhere else. Uniform or not, it doesn't mean what it used to. The mood shifted. A wave of unease rippled through the rows. Some exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. The man, apparently unfazed, adjusted his seatbelt without a word. But her comment lingered, unsettling, out of place. Why target someone who had done absolutely nothing wrong? The aircraft climbed, but the tension remained, like static in the air. As the seatbelt sign switched off with a soft chime, the woman's demeanor seemed to sour further. She twisted slightly to glance back at the soldier, her disapproval as obvious as the afternoon sun. Leaning toward the older gentleman next. To her, who wore a bright floral shirt and seemed trapped between courtesy and discomfort, she whispered, "It's odd, isn't it? A soldier on a flight like this. Don't they usually have their own planes?" The man offered a vague shrug, clearly hoping to exit the conversation, but she kept going. Honestly, nowadays anyone can wear a uniform. Doesn't make them some kind of hero. Her voice carried farther than she realized, or maybe that was the point. A woman across the aisle looked up from her paperback, frowning. A young couple a few rows ahead exchanged awkward glances. Still, the soldier said nothing. Focused on a notebook in his lap, he kept writing. Maybe a journal entry, maybe a letter, whatever it was, it held his full attention. He didn't react to her words. Didn't look her way. His calmness seemed to annoy her even more. She jabbed the call button. A cheerful flight attendant named Karina appeared promptly. "Yes, ma'am. What can I do for you?" "I'd like to change my seat," the woman said, nodding toward the uniformed man beside her. I'd be more comfortable elsewhere, somewhere less distracting." Karina blinked, her professional expression concealing a flicker of surprise. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she replied calmly, "but the flight is at full capacity. There aren't any available seats." The woman exhaled dramatically and gave a dismissive wave, as if brushing off an inconvenience too trivial to waste more breath on. "Fine. I'll survive." The nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably. A man in his 30s leaned in to quietly whisper to his partner, "What's her deal?" But the silence held. No one dared break the invisible barrier of social politeness, even as tension simmered just beneath the surface. The uniformed man remained composed. He kept writing, pausing now and then to glance out at the clouds. Whatever he was penning seemed far more meaningful than the negativity surrounding him. But his unbothered calm only seemed to irritate the woman further. When the beverage cart reached their row, she struck again, her voice loud enough to draw attention, her words dripping with disdain. "I guess the bar's been lowered these days. I can't imagine my father sitting next to someone like that in his time." Karina hesitated for a moment, then quickly recovered. "Would you care for tea or coffee, ma'am?" "Black coffee, no sugar." "No cream!" she snapped, clearly annoyed that her jab hadn't sparked the reaction she'd hoped for. When the attendant turned to the soldier, he simply asked for water, offering a kind smile. Thank you, he said, his tone warm and respectful. Karina returned the smile, visibly relieved to share a moment of human decency amid the discomfort. As the plane cruised onward, the woman didn't let up. Her complaints grew sharper, targeting everything from the seat comfort to the drink selection to the cabin temperature. Each remark felt like a thinly veiled attack, always pointed in the same direction. And yet, through it all, the soldier didn't flinch. He remained still, his shoulders loose, his eyes locked on his notes. Occasionally, the corners of his lips lifted, just a bit, not quite a smile, but something thoughtful, almost reflective. It was obvious he had long since learned how to endure this kind of behavior without allowing it to touch him. He looked to be in his late 20s. His jaw was defined, his gaze sharp with quiet strength. His uniform showed faint signs of wear, small threads undone, a faded patch or two, but it was clear he treated it with care. It wasn't just clothing to him. It stood for something greater. At one point, a small boy in the row ahead peeked over the seat, his tiny fingers clutching the headrest. He couldn't have been older than 5. "Are you a real soldier?" he asked, wide-eyed with curiosity. The man looked up, his features softening instantly. "Yes, I am," he answered with a gentle nod. The child's mother turned quickly, looking apologetic. "I'm so sorry, he's just curious." "No need to apologize," the man replied kindly. "Curiosity is a good thing." The boy beamed, clearly impressed. "Do you fight bad guys?" he asked, eyes filled with awe. The soldier hesitated. For a second, the smile slipped from his face. "Sometimes. I help keep people safe," he said carefully, his voice low and sincere, carrying the weight of things too complex to explain to a child. The brief exchange between the child and the soldier may have been short, but its impact was far from small. A few passengers who had only offered passing glances earlier now looked at him differently, their curiosity replaced with quiet respect. Still, the woman in the crisp blazer sat stiffly in her seat, clearly unmoved. She rolled her eyes and mumbled under her breath something about pretending to be a hero. The soldier didn't acknowledge her. He simply went back to his writing, the pen gliding slowly, deliberately across the paper. A few rows behind, Karina leaned over to whisper to her fellow crew member, "He's got more patience than anyone I've ever seen." And she was right. It wasn't that he didn't hear the woman. He heard every word. He had simply chosen not to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Maybe it was because he'd heard this kind of talk before. Maybe it was because he knew which battles were worth fighting, and this wasn't one of them. Or maybe he was carrying something too heavy for her words to even matter. As the plane began its descent into Tucson, the soldier carefully closed his notebook and slid it into his carry bag. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a small, velvet-covered box, cradling it with care, almost like a fragile treasure. For a fleeting moment, something in his expression shifted. The still surface of composure gave way to something deeper, sorrow, maybe reverence. The box wasn't ornate or flashy, but its meaning was unmistakable. Those nearby noticed the subtle change, but no one asked. There was an unspoken respect for the silence around him. Everyone instinctively knew. This wasn't the time to intrude. He closed his eyes briefly, inhaling slowly. When he opened them again, the stillness had returned, his posture calm, his gaze steady. It was as if, in that small gesture, he'd drawn strength from a memory too sacred to speak aloud. No one, not even the woman, could fully grasp what that moment meant. Not yet. Not until the following morning, when the truth would unfold in a way that left no room for judgment. Sunlight poured through the kitchen windows of a quiet suburban home in Mesa, Arizona. The same woman from the flight sat at her table, nursing her morning coffee, absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone. Checking. Emails, notifications, the usual. The flight from Atlanta felt like a thing of the past. To her, it had been uneventful. She'd already forgotten about the discomfort she'd caused, brushing it off like background noise in a routine day. Mornings were always the same. Coffee, a quick skim of the headlines, then calls before her mid-morning business meeting. But this morning, something stopped her. A headline grabbed her attention. Bold, impossible to ignore. Local soldier returns home, carrying fallen brother's ashes. Her thumb paused over the screen. Something about the photo beneath the title pulled at her memory. She tapped the link, and there he was, the man from the plane, his face unmistakable, his composed eyes staring out from the screen. The article unfolded the truth. Staff Sergeant Marcus Hale had returned from a difficult overseas tour, escorting the remains of his closest friend, Sergeant Brian Calder, who had died during an operation gone wrong. The small velvet box? It held Brian's dog tags, a final, intimate gift for the grieving family. As she continued reading, the weight of every word settled deeper. Marcus and Brian had grown up together, inseparable since childhood in Winston, North Carolina. They had enlisted side by side, vowing to protect one another. That promise had been tested during their last mission. Brian had shielded Marcus from a blast, giving his life to save him. Marcus had been the one to recover his friend's body and make sure he came home. The words blurred through her tears. Every smug comment she had made, every dismissive glance, it all came rushing back. She remembered his silence, his composure. Not because he didn't care, but because he was carrying a loss too sacred, too profound for petty words to reach. She lowered her phone, her appetite gone. The coffee had gone cold. Guilt washed over her in waves, heavy, suffocating. She had reduced him to a stereotype, spoken like she knew better. And yet, he had offered nothing but quiet dignity in return. The article ended with a quote from Marcus. "Brian wasn't just my best friend. He was family. Bringing him home was the least I could do. I'll carry his memory for the rest of my life." A tightness gripped the woman's chest. Her thoughts drifted to her own brother, lost in a car crash years before. She remembered the hollow ache, the overwhelming silence that followed his death, and how even the smallest act of compassion had felt like a lifeline during those dark, unrelenting days. How could she, of all people, have been so heartless to someone carrying such grief? Her mind spiraled with what-ifs. What if someone else had spoken up on the flight? What if she had simply kept her judgments to herself? The weight of her behavior pressed on her like a stone, and for the first time in a long while, shame took root deep inside her. She sat quietly now, staring through the window as the morning sun spilled long streaks of gold across her kitchen floor. But guilt alone wouldn't be enough. She felt it. In her bones, something had to be done. Her phone buzzed beside her, but the screen stayed untouched. The noise faded into the background as her thoughts rewound, replaying the flight moment by moment. Each cruel comment she had whispered, each look she had thrown now cut like shards of glass, and the soldier, Marcus. He had remained calm, composed, dignified in a way that only highlighted how far she had fallen short. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled once more through the article, pausing on the photo of him in full uniform beside a flag-covered casket. His face was strong, unwavering, but the sorrow in his eyes said more than any caption ever could. She broke down. The tears came fast, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs, the shame too much to bear. Her mind drifted to the stories her father used to tell, himself a World War I veteran, about loyalty among soldiers, about sacrifice, about the unbreakable bonds formed in the field. And now here she was, belittling a man who had returned home carrying not just ashes, but a piece of his own heart. She thought of her brother again, of the grief that still lingered like an old bruise, and of a memory she had buried, lashing out at a store clerk not long after her brother's funeral, directing her pain at someone undeserving. She had carried that moment for years, as a reminder of how easily pain becomes cruelty. And yet, she had repeated the cycle, this time toward a man who had already endured far more than she ever could understand. His silence had seemed passive, but now she saw it clearly. It was strength. a deeper strength than she had ever known. He had risen above her words, focused on what truly mattered, and in doing so, he had shown her something rare, grace, the kind she hadn't deserved. She thought about apologizing, but how? She hadn't even known his name. Until now. Trying. To find him felt invasive, and even if she did, what could she possibly say? No words could undo her behavior, but she couldn't leave it at that. She spent the rest of the morning reading everything she could about Marcus Hale. By afternoon, she'd discovered the nonprofit he had started in honor of his fallen friend. Brian Calder, a fund to help families of lost service members. Her heart ached as she read about those families, the lives forever altered by sacrifice. The following day, she donated. Her hands shook as she typed the short message. To Staff Sergeant Marcus Hale, I didn't know your story. Now I do. Thank you for your service, and for teaching me what real strength looks like. I'm sorry for the words I said. I'll carry this lesson with me for the rest of my life. Clicking send didn't erase the past, but it was a beginning, a step forward. She knew she couldn't rewrite what happened on that flight, but she could choose to change, to carry his sacrifice, and the lesson it brought with her always. That evening, she sat quietly on her porch, watching the sun melt into the horizon. The guilt hadn't left her, not entirely, but something new had taken root alongside it. Resolve. She had faced an uncomfortable truth about herself, and now, she was determined to change, not just for Marcus, but for everyone she'd meet moving forward, because the weight of her behavior on that flight wasn't just about a single moment or a single man. It was about the kind of world she wanted to help shape. From that day on, her mornings felt different. Each time she opened her phone or sipped her coffee, her mind drifted back to Staff Sergeant Marcus Hale and everything his quiet strength had taught her. His power didn't lie in ribbons or rank. It lived in the way he carried himself with dignity, even in the face of cruelty. He had taught her that true strength often lies not in what we say, but in what we choose not to say. That silence, when rooted in grace, can speak louder than any voice. She brought that lesson into her everyday life. At work, she listened more, truly listened. She chose kindness over critique. In her personal life, she reached out to people she'd pushed away, apologizing where she had once been too proud to admit fault. Gradually, the heavy guilt began to lift. It didn't vanish, but it evolved into a quiet commitment to grow. The story of Marcus and Brian became something she carried close, not as a scar, but as a symbol. A reminder of sacrifice, of friendship, of what it means to walk through this world with empathy. She told their story to others, not the part about her own shame, but about two soldiers bound by loyalty who reminded her what courage looks like, and every time she told it, she ended the same way. You never know what someone else is carrying, so choose kindness. Marcus never replied to her message, and she hadn't expected him to. Her apology wasn't about being forgiven. It was about acknowledging the harm and promising herself to do better. She hoped her small donation made a difference. She hoped in some way it honored the lives of men like Marcus and Brian. Life went on, but it moved differently. The woman who once judged so easily now tried to understand first. She couldn't change the past, but she could shape what came next, with compassion, humility, and respect. Because, in the end, it's not the careless words we blurt in frustration that define us. It's the actions we take after we've recognized the damage. If this story moved you, consider subscribing and sharing it. Let's remind the world that every interaction is a choice. Let's make it a choice we'll be proud of. Thanks for watching. Let's spread this message of empathy together.